There are way more than 5 annoying data loading errors, but we don't have all day, so we're going to tackle how to troubleshoot and solve the 5 that I find most annoying. First up is you can't log into Data Loader. It's like putting on your best outfit, doing full glam, and when you show up to the party, you can't get in the door. The second in the list is when you get an oddly specific error reason. It doesn't look like a system message per se, but you're not exactly sure what the issue is. The third, let's say you're inserting accounts or contacts and some of them aren't going in because they're being flagged as duplicates. Your job isn't to clean the data in this situation, it's to load it successfully. So you got to figure out how to bypass this blocker. In fourth place, you see the Insufficient Access Rights error, but of course it doesn't tell you which field in the row is causing the error, so that's an adventure in itself. And number 5, when you see ID value of incorrect record type, the troubleshooting experience is pretty similar to what you do when you get the Insufficient Access Rights error. Salesforce just likes to make it fun by not giving you quite enough information to know where you went wrong. So let's get the party started by troubleshooting the first error in our list, when you can't log in to Data Loader. Now, why this earns a place on my most annoying list is because Salesforce likes to give many different error codes and error reasons for what boils down to the exact same problem. Most of the time, you'll see an error like this: unable to complete OAuth login. The worst is when it says contact your Salesforce admin, and you're like, I am the Salesforce admin. If you see destination URL not reset or failed to send request, you're likely having issues with your server host URL. If you have no idea what that means, it's okay. What's ultimately happened is that the data loader utility is pointing toward one org and you're trying to enter in the credentials to another org. It's like you've got the right key, but you're putting it into the wrong house front door. The fastest way to solve for this is going into data loader settings, scrolling down to the authentication host domain URL for production, if that's where you're logging into, and setting it to login.salesforce.com. If that doesn't work, I recommend going into Salesforce, into the settings, look for data loader, and find the downloads so that you can update your data loader utility on your computer to the most recent version. As a last-ditch effort, you can try uninstalling and reinstalling data loader, which made me think of a very niche joke from a show I used to watch. Let me know in the comments if you recognize this guy. Let's jump into error number 2, the oddly specific error reason. You get your error file, you open it up, and you see something like this: clients must have a website. And you're like, what the heck does that mean? What field is erroring out? It doesn't tell you that, but it does tell you what error message is flagging. Using your sophisticated powers of deduction, you first determine what kind of error it isn't. It's not a duplicate error, it's not an invalid field value error, and reading the error message, it sounds like something is required to create a record that wasn't included in the source file. Head to the object's validation rules and look for a matching error message. In our situation, we can see that we tried to create an account record with the status of client, but we didn't include a website in the file, so the record failed validation. There are 3 options for solving this issue. Number 1, deactivate the validation rule and reload the failed data. This is a fast and easy way to get around this issue and mark your data load as complete. However, this validation rule will continue to prevent these records from being updated, whether it's manually or via automation, until the record meets the requirements. Option 2 is to update the source data to include necessary values to pass validation. We love this because it means we're creating records that are clean and validated, unless you're being told to put in fake temporary values like www.website.com in the data just to meet the validation rules. The third option is modifying the validation rule to include bypass logic so you as an admin are not beholden to it when you're loading data. We as data loading experts love this because it makes our job fast and effective. However, if you're also consulting the client on best practices, you have to make sure that you're giving them guidance on the old square peg round hole process that underlies trying to fit old messy data into new structured processes. Otherwise, there will be a mutiny at hand when the end users can't do their job because they're getting blocked by validation rules all day long. Speaking of dirty data, let's move on to annoying issue number 3, duplicate rule blocker. If you're inserting or editing records that have active duplicate rules on them, you may encounter the error message of use one of these records. This is the out-of-the-box message Salesforce uses on its duplicate rules. So that's how you know what blocked you. However, it's possible for the duplicate rule alert text to be modified. So it's a good best practice to double check these rules before you load. So how do we solve for this? I mean, ideally we use the tool as it's meant to be used and we simply don't create duplicate records. However, in certain data loading situations, we have to insert records that may be duplicates of other records with the understanding that the deduping will have to come later. The fastest way past this blocker is to deactivate the offending rules temporarily. Just don't forget to reactivate them. Another option is to change the rule action from block to allow, but again, don't forget to change it back. Moving on to number 4, the dreaded insufficient access rights error. When you give Salesforce IDs it can't find, or you're trying to create or edit records that would violate sharing rules or object permissions, you'll receive the insufficient access rights error. There are 3 steps to troubleshooting. First, identify which specific error you got, then use that information to validate the ID values in the prepped file. And then third, if your prep work seems solid, then there's got to be something else going on, perhaps with record sharing. So then you'll have to dive a bit deeper. Let's review the 2 insufficient access error messages. If you see insufficient access rights to object ID, then you have a permissions problem on the object you're loading into. For example, if you're inserting opportunities, the issue has something to do with the opportunity. You as the running user or the owner of the record you're inserting or updating could be lacking object level permissions. Check profiles and permission sets. There could also be a problem with lacking the right field level security privileges on a field in the load. The other type of insufficient access error includes the text on cross-reference ID, which is telling you that either you as the running user or the record owner doesn't have permission to access a related entity that must be granted in order to complete the load. If you're inserting opportunities and attempting to set a value in contract ID, for example, but don't have access to the contract object, you'll get an error. Since Salesforce only returns these insufficient access rights errors in specific situations, we can start our troubleshooting with the easiest potential problems in order to rule them out quickly. When your source file has a bunch of lookup relationships and IDs, it can get pretty time consuming to go field by field. So start by confirming that the record type IDs of the main object of the load are valid. Even better, if you're not using record type IDs, you can immediately rule that out as being a potential problem. But if you are using record type IDs, do they have the right number of digits? Are there typos? Did you mess up a VLOOKUP during data prep? Does your source file have valid data, but you're not mapping it correctly? All of these are things that you can troubleshoot on the record type ID field. When you give Salesforce a value, whether it's a record type ID, an account ID, literally any kind of ID, and Salesforce can't find it in the place it's supposed to be in, it returns the insufficient access error. Another possible cause of this error is when you're referencing a record that's been deleted. Troubleshoot this by grabbing a referenced ID from a row in the error file and paste it into Salesforce after .com/ in the address bar. Sometimes you get the error because the record you're referencing isn't shared with the record owner of the record you're inserting or updating. You know it exists, but you, or the record owner, depending on the situation, can't see it. Log in as a record owner and attempt to access the reference record. Salesforce Help tells us there are many reasons that these insufficient access rights errors can occur, which I feel is important to communicate here that the causes and troubleshooting I've provided should help you solve the majority of the reasons you'd encounter it, but not necessarily every single reason why. And finally, we've reached the 5th most annoying data loading error. You'll see the ID value of incorrect record type error in your file when there's an ID that doesn't match the expected object, is malformed, or assigned to the wrong field. So the troubleshooting process is very similar to the reasons that cause the insufficient access rights error. Troubleshoot by ensuring the ID in question is exactly 15 or 18 characters, contains no white spaces, and is the right ID for the target object. Unfortunately, troubleshooting data loading errors tends to be the way we learn the most about Salesforce's data model and how our files need to be structured in order for our data loads to successfully execute. If you'd like a part 2 with another 5 annoying errors, let me know in the comments.